Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. We now have just 23 days left in the Trump presidency, and Donald Trump is still refusing to concede or do much of anything for that matter, except make things more complicated and confusing for Joe Biden and the rest of the country. And we just lived through the better part of a week living that precise example. Last Tuesday night, Trump released a speech trashing the stimulus deal, the $600 checks to Americans, and the spending bills that would keep the government from shutting down. Every day after was a mystery. Would Americans get the help they needed? Would they get any help? Then last night, after absolutely nothing else changed, Trump signed the bills into law. Now, the bills do a lot, but most people are focused on those $600 relief checks. They'll work differently than they did in the spring. Top value, again, only $600 a person, with an additional $600 credits for every child under 17. 158 million Americans should get payments, 84% of them getting full payments, 5% getting partial payments. No idea why that doesn't add up to 100%. Payment levels will be based on your 2019 tax returns. The key dividing lines are $75,000 income levels and $87,000 incomes. Most people, except non-resident aliens and dependent adults, will qualify. As to the politics of Trump trashing the bill then signing it, he has been getting hammered from all sides. The headline of Politico, Trump got nothing. From their playbook, that's it. President Donald Trump made all this noise about COVID relief and government funding bill only to sign it and get nothing in return. Trump got taken to the cleaners, they wrote. What a bizarre, embarrassing episode for the president. He opposed a bill his administration negotiated. He had no discernible strategy and no hand to play, and it showed. He folded and got nothing, they wrote, besides a few days of attention and chaos. People waiting for aid got a few days of frightening uncertainty. They conclude zip, zero, zilch. If he was going to give up this easy, he should have just kept quiet and signed the bill. It would have been less embarrassing. Even the Murdoch-owned New York Post has had it with Trump, bashing him on the cover with "Stop the insanity, you lost the election, here's how to save your legacy," and a long editorial titled "Give it up, Mr. President, for your sake and the nation's." In it, they plead with Trump. "Mr. President," they write, "it's time to end this dark charade. You're cheering for an undemocratic coup, and Sidney Powell is a crazy person. Michael Flynn suggesting martial law is tantamount to treason. It is shameful," they write. It continues, "If Republicans lose in Georgia, Democrats will try to write you off as a one-term aberration, and frankly, you're helping them do it. The King Lear of Mar-a-Lago ranting about the corruption of the world." And they conclude, if you insist on spending your final days in office threatening to burn it all down, that will be how you are remembered. Not as a revolutionary, but as the anarchist holding the match. And Trump's follies with Congress continued tonight. The House just passed a bill boosting relief checks to $2,000 after Trump made the same push last week, but that bill will die in the Senate. The House is also in the process of voting to override Trump's veto of a defense spending bill, an override that should also pass the Senate. It would become the first successful override of a Trump veto. Trump has complained about the bill changing any military bases named after Confederate generals. He also wants liability restrictions on social media companies. And the bill Trump did sign, preventing a government shutdown that would have happened at midnight tonight. So what to make of the politics of the past week? For that, we turn to Marc Fisher. Marc is a senior editor at the Washington Post. He's also co-author of Trump Revealed, the definitive biography of the 45th president. Marc, let's begin with the president's delays and eventual capitulation on the stimulus bill. General consensus seems to be that the president got nothing out of it, and some have claimed that the president just embarrassed himself in the process. Have we missed anything here? Was there any upside for the president or his supporters? Is there some deeper level chess move I'm unaware of that the rest of us missed?
I wouldn't call it a deeper level chess move, but there certainly was some benefit to the president in solidifying his support with his base. It's always all about the base. It's always all about who likes or loves Donald Trump in the president's mind. That we've learned that over 5 years of seeing him as a candidate and as president. And so he's always looking for ways to test the loyalty of those who are loyal to him and to give them further reason to feel aggrieved or victimized as he does. And so he feels tremendously victimized by the results of this election. And this was a way of once again saying to his base, I am with you. I'm the only one with you. I'm going to somehow pull some victory out of this evident loss. And although he's not able to do that, he does say that. And for many people in his base, that's enough.
Begs the question, was this move about Trump again trying to pressure the Republican Party to take up his election overturn campaign? I mean, it makes a little bit of sense given that the only pain from the delay seemed to fall on the GOP. Trump, as you said before, big on control and solidifying control of the party, but to what end? He's never been one to catch more flies with honey, so it would fit in with his style. Was his Hamlet routine on stimulus connected to him trying to get another term?
I think in his mind it probably was, although logically it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There is no upside here as far as reshaping the legislation, although the president said in his signing message that he expected, and that there would be changes to cut some of the budget items that he opposes. There's no mechanism for doing that. Once he signed the bill becomes law, and that's the end of it. And so he can go back to Congress and say, would you pass something new? But that's obviously not going to happen in the waning days of a lame duck session. So there's not a lot of, this is yet another example of the president not quite understanding the mechanics of Washington, even at this late date, not quite understanding what he can achieve and what he needs Congress for, and when he's been beaten.
There, of course, has been some talk of efforts to try and disrupt Congress's approval of the Electoral College vote on January 6th. We know of at least one House member who seems to be on board, and perhaps an incoming senator, though we know that Mitch McConnell is reportedly working against that. Any developments on that front? Did the president's hesitancy when it came to stimulus change the metrics on that at all? And what are the arguments for and against Republican members to either join or not join that objection process?
Look, most Republicans in Congress are extremely eager to move on from Donald Trump. They don't say that publicly because they fear that their base will turn against them, that Trump will gin up a primary opponent for them and generally make life difficult for them. But privately, they can't wait for him to leave office, except for a diehard few. And that diehard few is, as you say, maneuvering to try to make January 6th the last stand for Trump to push back against Biden and somehow pull a victory out of this. There's no mechanism for doing that. Even if he were to get those handful of truly deep House loyalists to fight for him in the House, it wouldn't go anywhere because the Democrats still have a majority in the House. So this is not something that has a plausible outcome of victory for Trump. Nonetheless, it is part of building this
John,
body
with that, I yield back.
this group of people out there who see the system as being rigged, as the president does, and who are willing to follow him into his next endeavors, whether they be some profit-making endeavor or some future political one. More and more Republicans, even those who have been highly supportive of Trump, are pushing back against that privately and want to steer clear of him dominating the next 4 years for the Republican Party. But they don't know how to do it because they're in so deep with him.
As Trump continues his fight to try to stay in office, it's worth a reminder that Mitch McConnell is fighting to stay in his as well, which brings us to the Georgia runoffs. David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler had been campaigning on their efforts to secure those $600 checks just as Trump was trashing the total. Do we have a sense if Trump has hurt Republicans in Georgia, and if so, how much? And how important was Georgia in the thinking of Senate Republicans, none of whom seem moved to action by the president's delays on stimulus?
Right. I think that there's kind of a fever dream among many Democrats that Trump is somehow damaging the chances for the Republicans in Georgia by being inconsistent, by saying that the stimulus bill was a disaster and then signing it by saying that $600 was not nearly enough and insisting on $2,000 while the Georgia Republican Senate candidates say, oh, we're okay with $600. And now, of course, the president signs the bill for the $600 stimulus checks. So it's very confusing, but I don't see any reason why the average Republican in Georgia would say, oh, I'm not voting for my party's two Senate candidates because the president is kind of all over the board and is sometimes supportive of Republican measures and sometimes not. The president is going to bring his influence to bear. He's going to hold a rally in Georgia on the night before the election, although most Georgians will have voted already by that time. I don't see Trump really making the difference there at this point. This is like the presidential election, an election in which most views are already baked in and many votes have already been cast.
Couple of practical questions for you, Mark. Do we know what the delay will be in aid and assistance within the COVID relief bill because of the delay in the president signing it? Do we know when the checks will go out? And is anybody going to lose any portion of their expanded unemployment because it did lapse on Saturday before the president signed it again?
There seems to be a pretty good consensus that many people who had been receiving those unemployment benefits will lose 1 week of that money because of the lapse that took place when the president failed to sign the bill in a timely way. But those gears of government are picking up again, and there's some hope, or at least some expectation, that those stimulus checks could begin to move shortly after the new year. And obviously, there's not nearly a full staff of people in Washington to make that happen this week, a holiday week. So that may be delayed yet another week or so. But they were able, after the first stimulus check was passed, those went out with really quite rapid speed. And there's every expectation that that will happen again. The real crunch is for those who've been receiving unemployment benefits, those who are facing eviction, the loss of that week's money, and perhaps another week's money if it's further delayed. That can be a real pain and to some people. And if people are on the verge of being evicted, those few $100s could make all the difference in the world. So it's something that many Republicans are very pained by, because they had hoped that this stimulus bill would allow for Republicans to at least get back on the good side of those Georgia voters who they so desperately need next week.
This is not going to be the final debate over stimulus or COVID relief. And with that in mind, Trump's push for $2,000 checks seems a pretty clear signal that more needs to be done. Republicans have been resistant. They're expected to be even more so under President Biden. Did Trump just weaponize additional COVID relief to the benefit of Democrats? I mean, it seems like he's given them an ideal argument. Hey, even Donald Trump says we haven't done enough.
Right, but never underestimate the ability of Republican legislators to take both sides of the issue, and to, on one hand, be very much driven by what Trump says, on the other hand, sticking to their own authority in the Senate. And I think in a situation where President Biden is pushing for a much larger stimulus package, as he has indicated he will once he takes office, he'll obviously have the House on his side. But if the Republicans hold on to power in the Senate, there's every reason, given Mitch McConnell's past and his absolute commitment to pushing back against Democratic presidents, there's every reason to believe that he'll push back against whatever proposal there is from the other side, even if it did once have Donald Trump's blessing. And of course, don't put it past Trump to reverse himself yet again, and once he's out of office, turn against those $2,000 checks simply because they are supported by a Democratic president.
Finally, Mark, the defense spending bill. Congress is expected to override Trump's veto. It'll be the first time that will have happened under President Trump. I'm curious the significance of the override, but also, the sources of Trump's objections are worth noting. It was removing Confederate names from military bases and his push for social media liability laws. Both seem like pretty clear-cut culture war issues. Both have been used that way in the recent past. So what should we make of this expected override? That military spending is just untouchable, especially for Republicans? Or is there a little bit of capitulation on those cultural issues?
I don't think we're seeing capitulation on the cultural issues. I think what you're seeing here is a Congress that has still, even after all the polarization, even after all of the inability to get things done, many in Congress still have a residual feeling, sense that their job is to keep the government moving, to keep the paychecks coming to employees in the military and other aspects of the government. And that's what they will accomplish by overriding this veto. They will allow the military to continue its work uninterrupted and without the prospect of losing a paycheck. And so this is a kind of Congress coming to its senses and saying, look, we're going to do what we were sent here to do. On the Confederate names, that's something where there there is indeed a cultural war divide, and I think many Republicans in Congress would side with the president. But I think it's a different issue when it comes to the regulations and liability on social media and the ability of the tech companies to get away with allowing all kinds of speech and taking no responsibility for the speech that we find on social media. That is something that I think cuts across party lines. And I think the growing frustration with the tech companies has left both parties in the position of wanting to do something on that front, wanting to rein in the tech companies to some degree, and yet being highly dependent on those tech companies, both for getting their message out and for donations to their campaigns. So both parties very much torn by that, looking for a way to restore some regulation and put some balance into the media landscape, and yet not finding a way to do that. The first party that figures that out, I think, will really take a big step toward redefining itself and winning a significant amount of public support.
Well, it's supposed to be one of the quietest political weeks of the year, but all of those things are out the window in the era of Donald Trump. Marc Fisher, senior editor at The Washington Post. Marc, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
The House voting as we speak on the override of that defense authorization bill. We'll update that for you later on this edition of RFL. But up next, one of the top advisors for both of Bernie Sanders' presidential runs joins us to take a look at the state of the Democratic Party and also why he says Bernie has actually helped attract Hispanics to the Democratic Party.